A roar of engines once defined her world. Yet behind the chrome and speed lay a silence no spotlight could pierce. Amelia Hartford, a rising star in the adrenaline-fueled world of automotive stunts and social fame, faced a tragedy that shattered not just her career, but the fragile sense of self she had spent years forging. A sudden accident, a betrayal hidden behind smiles, and the ruthless pressures of online scrutiny collided into one devastating moment. How does a woman who seemed unstoppable confront the invisible wounds of fear, guilt, and isolation? As the cameras roll and the fans cheer, the real story, the story of loss, heartbreak, and the quiet fight to reclaim purpose, remains hidden. Tonight, we step behind the gleaming facade to witness the darkness that no applause can mask. The arena was alive with a mechanical symphony. Engines growling, tires squealing, and the low hum of anticipation vibrating through the air like a collective heartbeat. Bright floodlights cut through the darkness, casting long shadows across the concrete and metal, highlighting every rivet, every seam of the vehicles lined up for Amelia's career-defining stunt. The crowd, though distant in the stands, seemed to Amelia both present and impossibly far away, their cheers and murmurs blending into an indistinct hum that barely reached her ears. In that moment, she was both the master of her fate and a fragile thread suspended above chaos. As she gripped the wheel, knuckles white beneath the leather, her mind oscillated between calm focus and the creeping whisper of fear. She remembered every early morning in empty garages, the countless hours perfecting maneuvers, calibrating engines, and rehearsing every motion down to the subtlest shift of her weight. Success had always required precision. And yet, as the engines roared to life, there was a crackle in the air, a premonition of fragility. Then it happened. A miscalculation, a slip, a fraction of a second, the world fractured. Metal screeched, glass shattered, and the harmony of power and motion erupted into chaos. Time seemed to slow for Amelia. She felt herself jerked violently, her body pressed against unforgiving steel, and for a heartbeat, everything, every ambition, every triumph, every carefully constructed image, was reduced to a single terrifying question. Would she survive this? Her ears rang with the sound of the crash, a deafening chorus punctuated by her own rapid breathing and the distant gasps of witnesses. Physical pain surged, yes, but beneath it was a deeper, more insidious agony. The psychological tremor that would ripple through her for months. Fear, guilt, disbelief. They merged into a heavy fog. She had spent years building an identity of control, of fearlessness. Yet in those moments trapped in twisted metal, all that certainty dissolved. Her mind raced, replaying what could have been, calculating what she could have done differently, haunted by the echo of possibilities. The crowd would later describe the accident with detached clarity. Overturned vehicles, the sharp tang of smoke, the hurried shuffle of medical personnel. But no observer could penetrate the interior of Amelia's mind, where triumph and terror collided, leaving a gaping wound invisible to the world. As paramedics approached, she felt the sting of isolation, the realization that even surrounded by hundreds, she was utterly alone in this experience. And in that suffocating solitude, a new fear took hold, one that would shadow her long after the arena emptied, one that whispered a question she could not yet answer. Could she ever reclaim the life and identity that had just been ripped from her grasp? The lights dimmed, the engines quieted, and Amelia remained suspended in a fragile space between survival and loss, the echo of the accident lingering like smoke in the night. Long before the roar of stadium engines and the glare of cameras, Amelia Hartford's world was defined by the steady rhythm of a garage. The scent of gasoline, the metallic tang of engine oil, and the faint warmth of a recently fired motor became the textures of her childhood. It was here, amidst the tools, wrenches, and half-finished vehicles, that she first learned the intimacy of focus, the delicate dance between power and control, risk and mastery. Yet, even in this sanctuary, there was a quiet loneliness that clung to her like oil stains on the concrete. Her parents, larger-than-life figures in their own right, demanded excellence with a precision that sometimes felt cruel. Praise was rare. Expectation was constant. Small victories, winning a local competition, mastering a particularly tricky maneuver, were acknowledged with nods rather than embraces. In their eyes, she was either on track or falling behind, and the line between support and judgment was razor-thin. These early lessons carved into her a dual consciousness, a fierce, relentless ambition coupled with a deep-seated fear of inadequacy. Every success was tempered by anxiety, every smile shadowed by a question. Am I enough? School offered no reprieve. Classrooms were silent arenas of comparison, whispers of judgment following her through hallways. While her peers traded gossip and games, Amelia's mind was already calculating trajectories, visualizing mechanics, and imagining moments that few could comprehend. She was admired but rarely understood, and the admiration brought its own weight, the expectation that she perform, excel, and never falter. Even at 10 or 12, she sensed the price of failure was not just disappointment, but erasure, a quiet fading into obscurity that terrified her. At night, alone in her bedroom with the soft hum of a distant engine or the faint glow of a streetlight slicing across the walls, Amelia wrestled with questions too big for a child. Could she ever belong? Could her ambitions coexist with the longing for acceptance? Could she truly carve a life that was hers? Or would it always be a reflection of someone else's dreams? These internal conflicts simmered beneath the surface, shaping a resilience forged in solitude, but also a fear that intimacy, trust, love, connection, might be incompatible with the life she had chosen. And yet, in the quiet of the garage, moments of pure, unguarded joy emerged. The first roar of a successfully tuned engine, the hum of a car responding perfectly to her adjustments, the fleeting taste of triumph. These were her victories, unshared but profoundly her own. They were the seeds of the woman she would become, disciplined, daring, and yet secretly haunted by the persistent ache of isolation. As the chapter closes, the camera lingers on young Amelia standing beneath the glow of a single garage light, wrench in hand, staring at a car that reflected both her ambitions and her solitude. She does not yet know that the loneliness she feels now will shadow her even in fame, nor that the engines she loves will one day roar with consequences far heavier than the thrill of speed. The question remains, can the girl who thrives in solitude survive a world built on scrutiny, expectation, and betrayal? Adulthood arrived like a revving engine, fierce and unrelenting. Amelia Hartford stepped into the world of professional stunts and social fame with the quiet precision of someone who had trained every fiber of her body and mind for moments like this. Floodlights followed her every move. Cameras captured each daring maneuver. Fans idolized her skill and charisma. To outsiders, she seemed untouchable, a force of nature commanding mettle, speed, and attention. Yet behind the smiles and flawless execution, the weight of expectation pressed down relentlessly, invisible but suffocating. Every stunt demanded more than physical courage. It required a fragile equilibrium of timing, instinct, and calculation. In private, Amelia would replay each sequence over and over, dissecting minor errors, anticipating every possible risk. Sleep came in stolen hours, often to the soft whine of an engine still cooling in a garage, the smell of fuel and burnt rubber lingering like ghosts of past triumphs. Even victories were tinged with anxiety. What if one misstep shattered not just her body, but the carefully curated identity that the world now demanded she maintain? The online world added another layer of scrutiny. Every post, every behind-the-scenes clip, every casual smile was dissected by an audience that knew only what she allowed them to see. Praise was intoxicating, but criticism was a weight that dug deep, eroding confidence in subtle, insidious ways. Friends and colleagues sensed her growing isolation, but few could penetrate the armor she wore so seamlessly. Behind the bravado, doubt flickered constantly, whispers of inadequacy she had carried since childhood, amplified now by millions of invisible eyes. Relationships strained under these pressures. Mentors became rivals. Friends became competitors. The intimacy that had once offered comfort now threatened distraction, vulnerability, or betrayal. Nights that should have been celebratory became exercises in vigilance, anticipation, and cautious navigation. In those quiet hours, Amelia questioned not only her identity but the cost of success itself. The thrill she had once associated with freedom, the roar of an engine, the perfection of a stunt, now mingled with fear, a constant reminder that one miscalculation could undo everything. Amidst the dizzying ascent, a hidden danger lingered. An industry built on spectacle and loyalty as fleeting as smoke, where alliances shifted with the winds of fame and trust was a currency more valuable than skill. The very network that had propelled her to prominence also harbored forces that could unravel her carefully constructed life. And though she seemed untouchable, the seeds of vulnerability had been planted years before, nurtured by solitude, doubt, and the relentless pressure to perform flawlessly under the world's gaze. As this chapter closes, the camera lingers on Amelia in a dimly lit garage, leaning against the hood of her car, her eyes distant and thoughtful. Engines hum softly in the background, echoing the pulse of her ambitions and the tremors of fear that she can no longer ignore. The question hangs heavy. In a world that celebrates perfection but punishes the smallest misstep, how long can she maintain control before the fragile threads of her life begin to unravel? The world that had once celebrated Amelia Hartford turned silent overnight. The accident, though brief in real time, had carved a canyon of consequences that extended far beyond the arena, far beyond the cameras, far beyond the applause. Metal bent, engines groaned, and the scent of burnt rubber lingered like a stubborn shadow. But it was the invisible aftermath, the psychological fracture, that would haunt her the longest. In the sterile, white-lit hospital room, the machines beeped rhythmically, a cruel mimicry of life's continuity. Amelia lay rigid beneath crisp sheets, body bruised, muscles screaming in unfamiliar pain, but it was her mind that roared the loudest. Memories of the crash replayed unbidden. The screech of tires against concrete, the violent jerk of the car, the flash of lights, and the surreal silence that followed as she lay trapped, stunned. Each replay felt like a verdict, each recollection a reminder of what had been lost. Not just in ambition, but in identity, in the fragile sense of mastery she had cultivated over a lifetime. The public response was immediate and merciless. Social media churned with speculation, judgment, and thinly veiled ridicule. Sponsors withdrew silently, their logos disappearing as quickly as contracts had been signed. Former collaborators, once allies, distanced themselves in calculated caution. The industry that had elevated her now seemed indifferent, even predatory, and Amelia felt the full weight of isolation, as if the world had collectively exhaled and left her suspended in a vacuum of scrutiny. Sleep became a fragmented, elusive state. Dreams were invaded by the crash in vivid, torturous detail. Metal twisting, engines screaming, spectators gasping, and the constant question: could she have prevented this? Therapy sessions brought only partial relief, the kind that scratches the surface of guilt and shame but cannot erase the memory etched in bone and psyche. Each hour alone was a battle against spiraling thoughts, fear, doubt, and self-recrimination swirling into a relentless storm. Even the familiar hum of engines, once her sanctuary, now triggered panic, a cruel reminder that the thrill she loved had become the conduit of trauma. Physical recovery was grueling, but the emotional wounds ran deeper, unseen yet pervasive. Friends who remained offered cautious support, yet there was a hesitation, a distance born of unspoken fear, as if their empathy could not bridge the chasm the accident had created. Each step back into the world, each camera flash, each crowd murmur, was a negotiation between courage and fear. Amelia was no longer only racing against time or gravity. She was racing against memory, against judgment, against a creeping sense that the identity she had fought to construct might never be whole again. And yet, even in this suffocating darkness, a faint ember of determination persisted. Beneath bruised skin and fractured confidence, a question emerged, almost imperceptible but insistent. Could she reclaim control, redefine her narrative, and transform tragedy into a new form of strength? The chapter closes on Amelia alone in a dimly lit rehabilitation room, her eyes reflecting exhaustion, fear, and the faintest glimmer of defiance. Outside, the hum of distant engines beckons, a call both familiar and foreboding. The question lingers. Will she rise, or will the silence swallow her completely? The first steps toward light were small, almost imperceptible. A faint hum beneath the silence. A tentative glance toward engines that once symbolized fear and loss. Amelia Hartford had been broken in ways the world could not see. Body bruised, career fractured, psyche battered by doubt and isolation. Yet within that fracture, within the echo of silence that had swallowed her, a spark endured, a stubborn ember of purpose that refused to be extinguished. Recovery would not be a linear path, nor would it resemble the adrenaline-fueled triumphs of her past. It would be slower, quieter, yet infinitely more profound. Physical rehabilitation demanded relentless discipline. Limbs ached with movements that once had been effortless. Every exercise reminded her of limits she had never encountered before. She learned again to trust her body, to reconcile fear with strength, to measure risk with wisdom rather than abandon. Yet, the psychological reconstruction was far more intricate. Therapy sessions delved into memory, guilt, and the shadows of isolation. Amelia confronted not only the accident itself but the years of doubt, the childhood solitude, the relentless pressure of perfection she had carried like ballast. She grappled with questions that had no easy answers. Who was she, beyond the stunts, beyond the fame, beyond the expectations of a world that often confused spectacle with identity? Slowly, she began to forge a new relationship with her craft. She returned to garages, not as a performer desperate for approval, but as a student of her own limits, a sculptor of her identity. Engines, once harbingers of trauma, now became instruments of healing, an intimate conversation between control and surrender. She shared her journey candidly with a small, loyal following, documenting moments of fear and triumph, revealing cracks in the facade that once seemed impenetrable. Her openness drew respect, empathy, and a new kind of influence that had nothing to do with likes or views, but with authenticity and courage. Connections that had frayed under fame were tentatively rebuilt. Amelia mentored young drivers, guiding them not just in mechanics and maneuvers, but in resilience, focus, and the quiet strength required to navigate fear. Relationships evolved from transactions into trust. Laughter replaced tension in measured doses, and she discovered the joy of shared achievement, a joy grounded not in applause but in growth. Each day became a negotiation between past trauma and future possibility, with victories measured in courage as much as in skill. And yet, the shadow of her past lingered. Brief moments of panic, flashes of memory from the accident, whispers of doubt in quiet corners. But these shadows were no longer all-consuming. Amelia learned to coexist with them, to honor them as reminders of fragility and humanity rather than shackles of shame. She had become, in a sense, both the architect and survivor of her own identity, reclaiming power not through spectacle, but through authenticity, purpose, and reflection. The chapter closes as the sun dips below the horizon, casting long, golden streaks across a deserted racetrack. Amelia stands alone, hands resting on the hood of her car, engines humming faintly in the distance. Her eyes are steady, reflecting fatigue, sorrow, and a newfound serenity. In this silence, she is neither defined by her past nor enslaved by expectation. The roar of engines calls to her still, a reminder of her love, her fear, and the path she has chosen to walk with awareness and courage. She breathes deeply, poised at the threshold of her future. The lingering question remains, unspoken but potent. Can she continue to transform tragedy into strength, and will the world ever see the fullness of the woman she has become?